Racist teacher humiliates black student in front of all the students, but had no idea that the boy's father was actually the school principal. What if the true educator wasn't the one who teaches, but the one who learns to listen? The story unfolds in a high school in the suburbs of Chicago, where appearances can be deceiving and deeply rooted beliefs can lead to devastating consequences. Martha Robinson, a literature teacher admired for her conservative stance, does not realize that her prejudiced words can have a profound impact on one of her students' lives. Ethan Williams, a young black boy who has just transferred, soon finds himself at the center of a conflict that will not only challenge his resilience, but also reveal painful truths about education and empathy. In an environment where education is seen as a privilege, Ethan, a 16-year-old boy, arrives at the new school hopeful and determined. He carries with him the dream of standing out and making friends, but soon realizes that his new school is not as welcoming as he had imagined. As soon as he enters Martha's classroom, he is met with disdainful looks and hidden comments that reveal the subtle racism that permeates that environment. A public humiliation provoked by Martha not only shakes his confidence, but also makes him question his place in that space. Ethan soon decides that he will not tell his father about what happened. Dr. Marcus Williams, his father, and the new principal of the school, is a respected and admired man known for his fight against discrimination. He has always encouraged his son to be strong, to fight for justice, and not to be shaken by difficulties. As Ethan reflects on the situation, the division between the love and protection his father can offer and the desire to face his challenges alone becomes a dilemma that torments him. Amid this tension, the classroom transforms into a battlefield for Ethan, where he must prove his worth not only to his peers, but also to himself. With each humiliating word from Martha, his spirit strengthens, preparing him for a fight that goes beyond the walls of the school. And as he strives to find his place, his father, Dr. Marcus, begins to notice the subtle changes in his behavior. Torn between the role of father and principal, he decides that the best way to confront this situation is through education and dialogue. As the plot unfolds, Ethan and Marcus's paths cross in a powerful moment that could forever change the dynamic between them and the school. Through lectures on racism and inclusion, Marcus seeks not only to protect his son, but also to transform the mindset of the teachers and students. Ethan's journey becomes a reflection on the true meaning of education and the importance of listening and learning from those around us. At the climax of the story, an emotional speech by Marcus not only exposes the hypocrisy of traditional education, but also provokes a change of heart in Martha. She finds herself confronted with her own prejudices and must decide whether to redeem herself or remain in her comfort zone. Ethan's battle for respect and dignity transforms into a life lesson that resonates with everyone, showing that often the true educator is the one who learns to listen and opens up to transformation. Ethan entered the classroom with a racing heart, feeling the pressure of his peers' gazes upon him. It was his first day at the new school, and he yearned for a promising start. However, upon seeing Mrs. Martha approach, a wave of apprehension washed over him. Martha, with her rigid posture and critical gaze, seemed to embody all his insecurities. As she began the class, she made a tasteless joke about the new students, and Ethan, who was sitting in the front row, felt his cheeks heat up. He knew the joke was aimed at him. The laughter that followed was like daggers, and he struggled to maintain his composure. What should have been a safe space for learning quickly turned into an emotional minefield. He looked at the other students, hoping to see some friendly faces, but found only looks of disdain and indifference. At first, Ethan tried to ignore it. With a forced smile, he told himself that everything would be fine, that it was just one day. But as the days turned into weeks, the pain of humiliation intensified. The challenges Ethan faced were not only external, they struck at the core of his identity. He wondered if he was really strong enough to endure that pressure, if he could be accepted in a place that seemed only to reject him. What troubled him even more was the idea that his father, Dr. Marcus, the respected principal of the school, believed he was an example of strength and resilience. But inside, Ethan felt shattered. Meanwhile, his classmates were also facing their own struggles. Sarah, a girl with curly hair and a warm smile, was one of the few who seemed to notice Ethan's suffering. She had struggled against the pressure to fit in and was determined to be a friendly voice amid the hostility. However, she too felt vulnerable as the school's popular group was relentless. Every time she tried to approach Ethan, she felt the judgmental stares of others, which made her hesitant. She wanted to help, but her own insecurity held her back. On the other hand, there was Jake, an athletic student who stood out on the football team. He was popular and had a reputation to maintain. Deep down, Jake admired Ethan for his courage in facing the new environment, but he didn't know how to position himself. He found himself caught between loyalty to his friends and the desire to be fair. Ethan and Jake's friendship seemed like a possibility, but social barriers and the fear of judgment made this connection almost impossible. The emotional impact of the challenges began to manifest physically in Ethan. He started experiencing frequent headaches, and his energy decreased every day. The nights were long and lonely, filled with negative thoughts, while classes became increasingly unbearable. He tried to focus on the literature lessons, but Martha's words echoed in his mind like a mantra of doubt. She seemed to whisper in every class, telling him, "You don't belong here." The breaking point came during a class discussion about a book that dealt with the struggle against oppression when Martha made an unfortunate comment. Some students need to understand that life is not a fairy tale. No matter how hard you try, not everyone can be the heroes of their own stories. That statement hit Ethan like a bolt of lightning. He felt paralyzed, unable to respond. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he fought to keep them from falling. The feeling of helplessness consumed him, and he decided he needed to do something, but he didn't know where to start. Feeling lost, Ethan chose to distance himself from his classmates. He began spending more time in the library, where he found refuge in the pages of books. Every story he read seemed to speak to him, offering advice and a glimpse of a different world where struggle and overcoming were possible. But no matter how much he tried to isolate himself, the pain of rejection and humiliation did not go away. Ethan began to reflect on his father, who always told him that education was a powerful weapon. He realized that to be heard, he would need to find a way to make himself heard. But how could he do that when the very teacher who was supposed to guide him seemed to be the biggest barrier? Ethan's internal struggle was palpable. He wanted to be strong, wanted to make his voice count, but with each passing day, doubt grew stronger. The pressure to fit in, to not displease, was consuming him. He was at a crossroads where every misstep could lead him to an even darker place. The life lessons he had always considered true were being tested, and the need to defend and assert himself grew more urgent by the moment. Ethan continued to feel more isolated each day. The library had become his refuge, a place where he could lose himself in stories of overcoming and courage. However, even there, the shadow of humiliation followed him. He remembered Martha's words and how they made him feel small. With each new book he read, he hoped to find an answer, a magic solution to help him deal with the pain he felt. But the pages could not offer the comfort he so desperately desired. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had been observing Ethan's suffering from a distance, decided it was time to act. She could no longer watch her classmates suffer without doing anything. One day, during break, she approached him in the library. With a shy smile, she said, "Hey, would you mind helping me with a science project? I really need someone who understands the subject." Ethan, surprised, hesitated, but the desire to connect with someone made him agree. What started as a simple collaboration on a science project quickly turned into something more meaningful. With each conversation, Sarah shared her own insecurities and the challenges she faced to fit in. She talked about the pressure she felt to stay close to the popular group and how it left her distressed. The connection between them grew, but Ethan still felt divided. He wanted to open his heart, but the pain of rejection still weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, Jake watched the growing friendship between Ethan and Sarah. He felt torn. On one hand, he wanted to support Ethan, but on the other, the pressure from his friends pushed him in the opposite direction. One afternoon, while walking down the hall, he heard some of his classmates mocking Ethan. Laughing, they called him a loser and insinuated that he didn't belong among them. Those words cut Jake. He realized he could no longer remain silent. Determined to do something, he approached Ethan and Sarah in the library. "Hey, I'm here to help too," Jake said, trying to show he was willing to change. Ethan looked at him with suspicion, while Sarah smiled in relief. Jake began participating in discussions about the project, but tensions remained. The friendship forming among the three was constantly threatened by external pressure and internal insecurity. As the project progressed, the science teacher decided the presentation would be done in groups, in front of the entire class. The idea of speaking in front of his peers made Ethan's heart race. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and memories of past humiliations haunted him again. However, Sarah and Jake were there to support him. They rehearsed together in the library, and the empathy they shared began to give Ethan a new perspective. But Ethan's insecurity did not easily disappear. The night before the presentation, he couldn't sleep. The insecurities came back full force. He wondered if he would be able to get everything right, if he could speak in public without stuttering, or if he would once again be the target of jokes. The fear paralyzed him, and he began to consider giving up. On the morning of the presentation, his stomach was in knots. When it was time to go on stage, Ethan felt his legs tremble. He looked out at the audience and saw curious gazes, but also the supportive expressions of Sarah and Jake. That gave him a small wave of courage. He started to speak, but soon lost himself in the words. The memories of the past invaded his mind, and he stuttered, which made some students laugh. Those laughs echoed in his head like an echo of all his pain. Desperate, Ethan felt that everything was lost. He thought about giving up and running away. But in a moment of clarity, he remembered the lessons he had learned from the stories he had read. He decided that he wouldn't let the cruel words of others define him. He took a deep breath, looked at Sarah and Jake, and spoke from the heart. He shared his experience of struggle, the pain of rejection, and how he was determined not to let it bring him down. Before we continue with this emotional story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and let us know which city you're watching this video from in the comments. Silence filled the room. When he finished, he didn't know what to expect, but to his surprise, the audience was silent for a moment before starting to applaud. He looked at the faces of his classmates and saw expressions of understanding. That connection, that empathy, was something he never expected to find. Ethan had faced his fears and, for a brief moment, felt strong. But at the same time, insecurity still lingered. He knew the struggle wasn't over. The battle against the voices telling him he didn't belong was still ongoing. And as the audience applauded, he realized that even though the path was difficult, he was no longer alone. With Sarah and Jake by his side, he was willing to keep fighting, to rise up after every fall. And so, a new journey began, full of challenges, but also of hope. Ethan was still absorbing the impact of the presentation when a new wave of emotions hit him. The applause from his classmates echoed in his ears, but behind that approval, he felt an emptiness. He had shared his truth, but insecurity still followed him like a shadow. After the presentation, while Sarah and Jake congratulated him, a strange feeling began to settle inside him. He wondered if that moment of bravery really meant something, or if it was just a brief pause in his internal struggle. In the following days, Ethan returned to the library, his refuge, but unlike the first time, he didn't feel comfortable. The stories that once inspired him now seemed distant. He sat at a table, surrounded by books, but his mind was preoccupied with what would come next. Social pressure and the fear of rejection manifested again, more intensely than before. Martha's words echoed in his head, and he found himself wondering if anything had really changed in his life. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jake continued to support him. They invited him to lunch and included him in activities outside of school. However, with each interaction, Ethan felt increasingly anxious. He feared that at some point, the truth about his insecurities would be revealed. One day, while they were talking in the cafeteria, Jake made a joke. He shouted, "Hey, Ethan, ready for more applause at the next presentation?" Laughter spread across the table, and Ethan, instead of laughing along, felt as if his heart had been crushed. He fell silent, tension building inside him. The night had a bitter taste. He decided he needed some time alone to think. After such a tumultuous day, Ethan walked to the park near his house. He sat on a bench, watching the leaves fall. The cool wind seemed to whisper that he needed to face his doubts, but he didn't know how. He began to rethink his choices and wondered if it was really worth opening up to others. He remembered every humiliation, every disdainful look he had ever received. The idea of exposing himself again terrified him. It was then that an unexpected event occurred. A group of students he knew, those who used to mock him, decided to pass through the park. They didn't see him at first, but when one of them recognized him, the scene would change everything. One of the guys, Tom, approached Ethan with a mocking smile. "Look who's here, the great presenter," applauded by the whole class. The others laughed, and the pressure from the past intensified. The pain of rejection he thought he had overcome came rushing back. Ethan felt anger and sadness mix inside him. He wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, he stood up and tried to leave, but Tom continued to provoke him. "What's wrong, Ethan? Afraid to speak again?" That was like a blow. He stopped, turned around, and looked into Tom's eyes. What he didn't expect was that, in that moment of weakness, something inside him would awaken. He remembered the stories that always inspired him, the lessons he learned about courage and resilience. Instead of letting the pain take over, he decided it was time to confront his fears. "You can laugh at me, Tom, but I know who I am. I'm learning to be better every day, and you can't bring me down," Ethan said, his voice steady. To his surprise, the room went silent. Tom hesitated, and for a fraction of a second, Ethan saw a look of surprise on his face. But Tom's response was quick. "Oh, how cute. Look at this, the loser trying to stand up for himself." He laughed, and the others laughed along. But instead of feeling the pain of rejection, Ethan realized that laughter no longer affected him in the same way. He had become stronger, even if he was still struggling to believe it. The revelation he had that day was powerful. It wasn't just about what others thought of him, but about how he saw himself. He realized that his journey of overcoming was not a straight line, but a path full of ups and downs. And while he was far from perfect, he was learning to be kinder to himself. With that, Ethan decided he would no longer hide. He stepped away from the group, not in anger, but with a new sense of purpose. With each step he took, he felt the pressure dissipate. He would return to Sarah and Jake and tell them how he felt. After all, true friendship is not based on perfection, but on the acceptance of flaws and the willingness to face challenges together. And so, as he walked back, Ethan knew that the battle was not over yet. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it. He looked up at the sky, feeling a bit lighter, and smiled. Life still had many challenges ahead, but now he was ready to confront them. Ethan walked home with a racing mind, but there was a lightness in his heart that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had faced Tom, and although the situation had not unfolded like a fairy tale, he felt stronger for having spoken up. Upon entering the house, the silence of the environment contrasted with the storm of emotions still swirling around him. He sat down at the kitchen table and began to reflect on everything that had happened. The following days were a mix of euphoria and anxiety. Ethan realized that despite making significant progress, his internal struggle was far from over. At school, the looks directed at him changed slightly. Some classmates respected him more, while others seemed more willing to provoke him, as if they wanted to test his new attitude. What should have been a relief became a source of stress. He felt watched, like a target in an open field. Sarah and Jake continued to be his unwavering support. They noticed the change in Ethan, the newfound confidence he displayed, but they also sensed the shadow of insecurity that still loomed over him. During lunch, Sarah asked how he felt now, saying that what had happened with Tom was amazing. Ethan smiled, but the truth was that he still felt vulnerable. It was good, but he was still afraid. What if they came after him again? What if this wasn't enough? Jake, always the optimist, added that he had already taken the first step and shouldn't forget that they were there for him. If anyone tried to bring him down again, they would be by his side. Those words brought comfort, but Ethan knew that the true battle was within him. He began to wonder if he could really stand firm when the teasing returned. And as much as he wanted to believe he had overcome his old insecurities, a part of him still feared rejection. Soon, a new challenge arose. During a class, the teacher announced there would be a group presentation. The idea of having to speak in front of the class again made Ethan's stomach churn. He looked at Sarah and Jake, who seemed excited about it. Jake exclaimed that they would do something incredible, but for Ethan, that enthusiasm was terrifying. The pressure of having to expose himself again brought all his old insecurities to the surface. In the days that followed, he dedicated himself to studying and preparing his part for the presentation. But the anxiety was palpable. He began to have sleepless nights, haunted by the fear of failure. What would happen if he forgot the words? What if others laughed at him again? These questions tormented him, and the confidence he had felt after confronting Tom seemed to fade away. During one of these moments of introspection, Ethan decided to visit the library again. He walked through the shelves, searching for a book that could inspire him. As he flipped through the pages, he found a journal he had read months ago. It was the story of a young woman who faced adversities and found her voice. Her words touched him deeply. He realized that everyone faces challenges at some point, and that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. With that in mind, Ethan decided he couldn't let fear win. He sought out Sarah and Jake and shared his insecurities about the presentation. To his surprise, they supported him. Sarah suggested they practice together, assuring him he wasn't alone in this. That offer made Ethan feel more secure. During the rehearsals, he allowed himself to make mistakes, and the laughter and fun they shared eased some of the tension. On the day of the presentation, Ethan's heart raced. He looked at his friends beside him and felt a small surge of courage. When it was his turn to speak, he remembered the words from the journal and what he had learned about himself. He took a deep breath and began. The fear was still there, but he decided not to let it take over. The presentation was a success. The applause echoed, but more importantly, he had allowed himself to shine. Later, as he sat with Sarah and Jake, the feeling of accomplishment was indescribable. They laughed and celebrated the moment, but Ethan knew the road ahead would still have its challenges. He was aware that insecurities wouldn't disappear overnight, but now he had a new emotional arsenal. He had learned that true strength came from facing his fears, and this was just the beginning of his journey. In his heart, he knew that regardless of what the future held, he had friends by his side and a new perspective on himself. Life was a path filled with obstacles, but now he was willing to walk it, one step at a time. Ethan walked through the school, feeling the weight of others' expectations on his shoulders. After confronting Tom, he had hoped things would improve, but reality was more complicated. He noticed looks of admiration, but also some mischievous smiles. The battle he thought he had won still had echoes. The newfound confidence he had found mixed with the shadow of insecurity. He sat at his desk during lunch, watching Sarah and Jake animatedly discuss the upcoming presentation. Ethan's heart raced at the thought of having to expose himself again. The idea of speaking in front of the class made him feel a knot in his throat. While his friends were making plans, he wondered if they could see through his facade of bravery. The pressure consumed him, and the anxiety turned into sleepless nights. But Ethan was not alone. Sarah and Jake were always by his side, ready to offer support. When he finally decided to open his heart, he felt a huge weight being lifted off his shoulders. He confessed, "I'm afraid of failing again." Sarah, with her gentle demeanor, held his hand. "You don't need to be perfect, Ethan. We're here to help you." That simple statement brought unexpected comfort. He realized he didn't have to carry the burden alone. During rehearsals, Ethan began to loosen up. Jake's laughter, Sarah's smiles, all of it helped to dissipate some of the tension surrounding him. He allowed himself to make mistakes, and in doing so discovered that laughter and fun were powerful allies in overcoming his fears. With each rehearsal, he felt stronger, less like a target and more like an active participant in his own story. The day of the presentation arrived, and Ethan's anxiety was palpable. He looked around the room, feeling his heart race. But instead of being overwhelmed by fear, he remembered the times he had leaned on his friends. He took a deep breath, and as he began to speak, he felt that he was not only presenting, but also revealing himself. He spoke with sincerity, and the connection he felt with the audience encouraged him. The fear was still there, but now it was a part of him, not the controller. When the applause echoed after his presentation, Ethan felt a wave of relief and joy. He had not only faced a challenge, he had found a new facet of himself. The feeling of accomplishment was indescribable, and as he sat with Sarah and Jake, he realized that this moment was more than just a personal victory. It was a symbol of his transformation. In the days that followed, Ethan reflected on his journey. He now understood that true strength was not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it. He began to see challenges from a new perspective. He realized that failing was not the end, but an opportunity to start over, to learn, and to grow. He remembered how his friendship with Sarah and Jake had been crucial to his transformation. They not only helped him confront his insecurities, but also showed him the value of true friendship. Ethan began to apply the lessons he had learned to other areas of his life. He got more involved in classes, started participating in extracurricular activities, and even signed up for a theater club. Each step he took, however small, helped to build his confidence. He realized that success was not about being the best, but about being authentic and trying his best. The new perspective he had gained also led him to reflect on his life. He realized that what truly mattered was not others' opinions, but how he saw himself. He learned that happiness was a state of mind, cultivated by the choices he made and the people he chose to have by his side. Life was full of challenges, but now he was willing to face them head-on. Ethan knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more obstacles ahead, but he was determined to keep moving forward. With the support of his friends and the newfound strength he had discovered within himself, he felt ready to face whatever came his way. Life was a road full of surprises, and he was prepared to embrace every moment, one step at a time. The day of the final project presentation was approaching, and Ethan's anxiety was at its peak. He had prepared for that moment, but the pressure felt greater than ever. As he entered the classroom, his gaze met Tom's, who was watching him with a sneer. The old rival still loomed like a shadow in his mind, and the old insecurity threatened to resurface. Ethan felt his heart race, and a knot formed in his throat. Sarah and Jake were by his side, but at that moment, all Ethan could hear was the echo of his doubts. The fear of failure, of being ridiculed, seemed to occupy all the space in his mind. He remembered the sleepless nights, the constant struggle against anxiety. What he really wanted was to feel free from that pressure, but reality confronted him. What was going on in his mind was reflected in his body, and the tension was palpable. When it was his turn to present, Ethan felt the weight of the classroom on his shoulders. All eyes were fixed on him, and the anticipation hung in the air. He took a deep breath, trying to gather the courage he had found during rehearsals. But as he looked at the class, the memory of Tom's taunts hit him like a punch in the stomach. The confidence he had built seemed to crumble. "You can do it, Ethan," Sarah whispered, as if she could read his thoughts. He felt a small surge of hope, but fear still held him captive. He remembered his journey, the failures, the fresh starts, the unwavering support of his friends. With a colossal effort, he decided to face what terrified him. He needed to do this not only for himself, but also for those who believed in him. With his heart pounding, Ethan began to speak. At first, his voice was shaky, but as he progressed, he remembered what he had learned. He didn't need to be perfect. He needed to be authentic. The words began to flow, and he allowed himself to be vulnerable. He shared his insecurities, the challenges he had faced, and how Sarah and Jake's friendship had helped him find his inner strength. The room was silent, and as he spoke, the tension began to dissipate. He looked at Sarah and Jake, who were watching him with pride. That connection encouraged him even more. He remembered the laughter, the heartfelt conversations, and how he had freed himself from the weight of his insecurities. With each word, he felt that he was not just presenting a project, but also revealing a part of himself. Yet, deep down, he still feared Tom's reaction. The rival had always been a threatening presence, and the idea of being the target of ridicule again terrified him. However, as he looked at the class, he saw that the faces staring back at him were not there to judge him, but to listen. He remembered that those who truly mattered would be by his side, regardless of the outcome. When Ethan finally finished his presentation, a reverent silence filled the room. He felt that he had stripped away his insecurities and had shown himself to be genuine. Then, something unexpected happened. The class began to applaud. The sound of the applause echoed like a balm for his soul. He had faced his greatest fear, and in that moment, he understood that no matter what happened, he had surpassed himself. The applause grew louder, and Ethan felt tears of relief welling up in his eyes. He looked at Sarah and Jake, who were cheering with joy. The friendship they had built solidified there. In that moment of tension and overcoming, he realized that true victory was not in being perfect, but in having the courage to expose himself and be authentic. As he left the room, Ethan felt light, as if an immense weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had faced Tom, his insecurities, and the pressure of expectations. He understood that life was made up of challenges and that each failure was an opportunity to start over. Through the support of his friends and the strength he had found within himself, he had transformed a moment of fear into a celebration of courage. Ethan knew that the journey of self-discovery was far from over, but now he had the tools to face any obstacle that arose. He smiled, grateful to have friends by his side, and for having learned that true wealth lay in the relationships he cultivated and in the courage to be who he really was. Life was an adventure, and he was ready to embrace it fully, one step at a time. Ethan left the classroom with the applause still echoing in his mind. The relief he felt was indescribable, but there was something deeper there. He had faced his insecurities, and somehow that had transformed him. Looking at Sarah and Jake, who were walking beside him, he realized he was no longer alone. The journey that had begun months earlier, filled with doubts and fears, had now become a story of overcoming and friendship. Sarah exclaimed, "You crushed it, Ethan," her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I knew you could do it." Jake, always the more pragmatic one, added, "It was amazing to see you open up like that. You really touched the class. Most people don't have the courage to be so honest." Ethan smiled, still surprised by the warm reception he had received. "Thanks, guys. I really didn't expect it to go so well. I thought everyone would laugh at me." He remembered Tom, the shadow that had always followed him. Although he still felt a knot in his stomach at the thought of the rival, a new confidence was beginning to blossom within him. What Tom thought now seemed less important. What truly mattered was the support of his friends and the realization that he had been true to himself. As they walked down the hall, Sarah pulled Ethan aside. "Hey, you don't need to worry about what Tom might say. He doesn't define who you are. You are so much more than that." "I know," Ethan replied, a bit hesitant, But it's hard to push that voice aside. It always shows up when I least expect it. Jake intervened. You need to remember what happened today. You presented with courage and authenticity. That is the true victory. Don't let one person's opinion overshadow that. Ethan nodded. His friend's words resonated in his mind. He realized that what Tom thought no longer had power over him. The experience of the presentation had taught him a valuable lesson. True strength comes from being true to oneself and surrounding oneself with supportive people. In the days that followed, Ethan noticed a change in his behavior. He began to get more involved in school activities, joining clubs and connecting with new people. The anxiety was still there, but now he faced it differently. He remembered the feeling of being on stage and how vulnerability had transformed into a point of strength. One afternoon, while in the library, Ethan found Tom sitting at a table surrounded by a group of friends. His heart raced, but instead of running away, he took a deep breath and decided to approach. "Hi, Tom," Ethan said, trying to stay calm. Tom looked at him, surprised. "Hey, Ethan, you did well in the presentation, didn't you?" Ethan was taken aback by the response. "Thanks. I really put in the effort." "Yeah. I just wanted to say that even though we have our differences, it's nice to see you standing out," Tom admitted, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe I was too hard on you." The conversation was brief, but it meant a lot to Ethan. He realized that the rivalry that had once tormented him could be left behind. Sometimes people deal with their own insecurities in the wrong ways, and what had happened between them didn't need to be a burden. On his way home, Ethan reflected on everything he had learned. He understood that life is made up of ups and downs, and that each challenge brings with it the opportunity for growth. The support of Sarah and Jake had been crucial, but the biggest change was within him. He learned to accept himself, to value his achievements, and to see the beauty in authenticity. That night, as he lay down, Ethan felt at peace. He knew that the road ahead would still have obstacles, but he was now more prepared to face them. With a smile on his face, he closed his eyes, dreaming of new adventures and challenges, ready for the life that awaited him. The journey of self-discovery would continue, but with his friends by his side and his newly found courage, he felt ready for anything. Ethan had undergone a remarkable transformation. The presentation that once terrified him had now become a milestone in his life. He had not only overcome his insecurities, but had also begun to see the world differently. Through the support of his friends, Sarah and Jake, he learned that true strength lay in being authentic and embracing his imperfections. The fear that once paralyzed him had now turned into motivation. In the following days, Ethan dedicated himself to new activities. He joined the theater club and started participating in school events, where he met people who shared his passions. However, even with this newfound confidence, he knew there was still a lingering challenge: his rivalry with Tom. That encounter in the library had been a positive step, but Ethan did not want to leave that story unfinished. A week later, during a school talent show, Ethan decided it was time to take action. He signed up for a special performance, where he would do a piece that blended theater and music. He wanted not only to showcase his talent, but also to send a message to Tom and to everyone who had doubted him. Deep down, he wanted to show that true victory was not in competing, but in standing out by being who he truly was. On the day of the event, the auditorium was packed. Anxiety crept back in, but this time Ethan used it to his advantage. He stepped onto the stage with a confident smile. As he performed, he realized that he was not just showcasing himself, but also challenging the expectations others had of him. He made sure to include a part of the presentation that addressed overcoming challenges and the importance of friendship, dedicating a special part to Sarah and Jake, who had always supported him. When the performance ended, the applause was deafening. Ethan felt a wave of emotion. He had done it for himself, but also for everyone who had helped him along the way. As he left the stage, he spotted Tom in the audience. Tom's expression was different. There was recognition there and acceptance. Tom approached, and before Ethan could say anything, He spoke. "You really crushed it. I underestimated you." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of relief and satisfaction. What once was a rivalry was now transforming into mutual respect. "Thank you, Tom. That means a lot to me," Ethan replied, feeling that he had finally earned not only Tom's respect, but also a part of himself that had been lost. Ethan's victory was not just about the stage or the performance. It was about the ability to rise up, to face fears, and to build new friendships. He learned that true wealth was not in winning over others, but in winning over oneself. The journey had transformed him, and every step he took brought him closer to who he truly was. On his way home, Ethan reflected on everything he had experienced. He had not only become stronger, but also wiser. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, but now he had the necessary tools to face them. With a new understanding of what it means to be successful, Ethan was ready for the next adventure. And, as he thought about his journey, he decided to share his story. He wanted to inspire others to face their own challenges and find the courage to be authentic. If you have also gone through tough times, know that it is possible to rise up and shine. Do not let negative voices stop you from being who you are. Share your experiences, and together, let's build a space of support and friendship. Like, subscribe, and let's embark on this journey together. Ethan's message was clear. True strength lies in authenticity and mutual support, and by encouraging others to join him, he knew that his journey was just beginning.